Hi all, welcome to the Plan Stage Weekly. We'll start off with team updates. Who wants to take this one on the UX side?
Yeah, so we have aligned to each group as UX designers. Holly's going to be working or focusing on project management. I'll be focusing on portfolio management, and Nick will be focusing on Certify. So that doesn't mean we're not going to help each other out or that you can't ask any of us questions, but that's going to be our main domain focus group within the stage. That's about it.
I'm next. So we have a stable counterpart from the AppSec team. That's Costal Maxim. I didn't know we had a stable counterpart in the AppSec team. It's not on our team page, but that's a quirk of the GitLab team.yaml file. I think, like, having spoken to Ethan, the best policy going forward is if we have AppSec concerns with any of our issues, that we sort of tag Costum, but also CC the rest of the AppSec team. To date, what we've been doing is just tagging the AppSec team. That's fine. They need visibility over it anyway. But it also means, like, I'll try and bring Costal in when we're doing our back-end kickoffs and stuff so that he can have a look through the deliverables in each milestone and kind of see for himself which ones might have implications for application security. So it's a bit of both, like it's a bit reactive and proactive. So he's going to join us in our kickoffs, but also like we can bring him in on any issues. So that's pretty much it.
Cool. I guess, Keen, do you want to take this next one or do you want me to? He's here. Oh, he's here. All right, I will. One of the things that I think I realized, I went on site last week with a customer, and it became pretty apparent that, like, given our size and how many different personas we're serving within Plan, that it would be really valuable if we had a more formalized product partnership program, sort of like CAB, but just for Plan and more hands-on and interactive, where the goal is basically we would identify 6 of these potential prospective customers or existing customers that aren't currently using Plan within GitLab. And maybe they're using something like Rally or Jira, and we would commit to working very closely with them over the next 12 months to create a product that they love and that they can then commit to using. And I think, like, I was reading Inspired on the way home and on the way there on the plane, and Marty Kagan basically says, like, 6 is a pretty good number. If you get more than 6, it's hard to keep up and pay close enough attention to each relationship and foster each relationship. But this is something I'm proposing. I'm also working with product marketing, sales, and anyone else in the organization we need to get blessing to do this. But the goal would be like weekly touch points, if we can get those with each of these 6 customers. And they would help provide feedback on what we're building, validations on the solutions we're proposing, as well as like using things earlier than maybe generally available, and helping us prioritize our roadmap so we're delivering the most value to their businesses, if that makes sense. So I think this should go through. There's good feedback initially. But yeah, I just wanted to make everybody aware. And I think there's a agenda point further down that we'll talk about in a minute, but just like getting engineering more involved in customer interviews and customer discovery activities, because I think there's a lot of power in doing that too. So if anybody has any feedback on this or concerns or wants to contribute to making it better, please leave notes on the issue. I think Kushal, you're next.
Next point is mine. It is about roadmap GraphQL pagination. So we have this issue scheduled for 12.8. We discussed it a while ago on planned team call, I believe, where we had a bunch of things happening on roadmap as user scrolls in either ways. So we solved the first part of buffer rendering, which was a performance problem, where if there are too many epics to show on a group level roadmap, then if we render all of them at once, then page load itself becomes slower. So we solved it. But then there are additional UX paradigms going on the page, where if user scrolls horizontally in the timeline, then we would make additional requests to fetch epics which are from a different time frame, and we would insert those epics within the roadmap list based on the sort order that user has selected and the start and end date values that we have for the epics that we received from the backend. And as I said, like they are inserted into the list. So we are performing on the fly sorting based on how we receive the epics from backend. So if user has like ascending order sorting done on the start date of epics, then if user starts scrolling forward in the timeline, then we would fetch epics and we would insert them in appropriate places within the list. Now, so that already is somewhat confusing in a way because epics show up in different places based on where how much user scrolls further back into the future or past. And now this issue focuses on the GraphQL pagination, which is another part of performance problem that we are trying to solve. So right now we already use GraphQL for GitLab org group on roadmap on gitlab.com. And there, although we are using GraphQL, we are not leveraging GraphQL's pagination abilities. Instead, we have basically increased the limit of number of epics that we receive on first call to 1000 epics. So right now, although we have only 700 epics, as long as they are under 1000, we would return them all of them at once on first call. But obviously, as number of epics grow for a specific group, this becomes a problem, and we need to fetch additional epics as user continues to scroll in. So we would basically cap that limit to 100 epics once GraphQL is updated to use that. But once we do that capping of 100 items, what happens is when user scrolls in horizontally, things start to basically combine. Like you have buffer rendering on the page, then you also have horizontal scrolling where we need to account for dates. And then there is the GraphQL pagination where we need to keep track of the cursor based on what API came back with for the page info. So when all of them are combined, UX becomes tricky to implement because things may show up in random places instead of where they should be. So do we have any decision on how do we want to handle sorting as long as there's a horizontal scrolling going on? I also have linked in the third point here, I've linked to a comment that I made on one of the existing issues around enabling GraphQL on production a while ago, where I shared multiple approaches that I could think of to solve this, both from the front end and back end perspective. Felipe knows the background of this. I don't think he's on the call today, but he worked on the GraphQL part of the roadmap backend, so he knows what we are trying to deal with here. And a while ago, I also was on a call with Alexis where I shared my pain of having horizontal scrolling on the timeline. And I was basically sharing my thoughts, like if we could get rid of it by using some additional UX on the page instead of allowing user to scroll endlessly, because the moment you introduce endless scrolling with so many parameters into the picture, it becomes difficult to handle. And so yeah, that was basically the idea. Like if we want to simplify the implementation of front end by combining both buffer rendering and GraphQL, then we need to get rid of horizontal scrolling in some way or the other. I'm not sure from the customer's perspective, like how much they rely on horizontal scrolling. And at the same time, I looked at Periscope data. I shared it on our plan channel, like how many users are actually visiting group level roadmap versus the roadmap tab on individual epics. Because so back when Victor was with GitLab, when we implemented the roadmap tab within the epic page, like if you open any epic and if it has multiple child epics, then we would have roadmap tab within the page itself where it would show roadmap timeline just for those child epics instead of all the epics from the group. And the Periscope data that I checked, the group level roadmap was not something which was very popular among users. People were visiting epic page instead of going to roadmap page. I assume there were two reasons of people not using roadmap page. One would be that it is not very useful because we are showing a lot of data on the page while people are interested in seeing the data just for one epic. Or it could be a performance problem. Like people found the page to be really slow on first load. So we solved the second point, like loading of the page is no longer a problem. But if a UX itself is something which is why users are not visiting the group level roadmap, then chances are that we are not doing something right with the page. And my guess is that horizontal timeline scrolling might be it, because the moment you scroll the timeline horizontally a bit, you see a lot of things popping up on the list as long as they adhere to the timeline and the sorting order and the dates. So just putting a lot of thoughts out there around the UX, around the timeline scrolling, and what is our take on it. Because given that this issue is planned for 12.8, and I haven't seen any discussion around how we want to solve the sorting part. And if at all we want to worry about sorting or not. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head where you're like, is this a UX problem? Is it timeline scrolling needed? How many users are actually using horizontal scrolling? I like the other question, why are they using the Epic roadmap instead of the roadmap page? I'm glad you got that data. I think those are things we need to explore and like talk to users about. I haven't really looked at this from a UX perspective yet and explored it in that way. So maybe we can get that prioritized. I know we had talked about in the past the idea of maybe brushing and zooming the roadmap. So instead of using horizontal scrolling, just allowing the user to basically zoom in and out of it manually. So I think there's a few things we could explore there. We just have to get that in design and start thinking about that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I can add some color on that too. So we also have to remember that right now roadmaps are locked to Ultimate, just like Epics are. So the pool of users that we're talking about is a lot lower than, say, issues. So we need to keep that in kind of just in context. The other side of that is from my conversations with users around portfolio management is we just don't have any functionality on the roadmap, which is one of the reasons we are pushing to add, adding progress information in the Epic bars and allowing you to pop open an Epic and see its sub epics. Like that's the base functionality that needs to be there for a roadmap to be something valuable. So that's what we know. From an assumption standpoint, I would assume that roadmap tab on Epics, I don't personally think it's super valuable. I think the reason we see more views there is because people go, what is that? And click it. I honestly, I've seen a couple people who new to the tool just clicking around and it's, oh, I did it. I was like, what does this show? But then it suffers from the same problem. There really isn't that much there. And so like Alexis said, I think as we add a couple more bells and whistles to the roadmap view and allow us to actually drive some additional usage to it, we can start learning more and perform better with it. Now with the horizontal scrolling, yeah, I mean, I don't have a good argument for why we need endless scrolling on the roadmap. I think we should cap it to some sort of timeline. I don't know, but I think I'd need a little more understanding of what's the smallest we can, or the largest panning timeline we can put in there that gets rid of some of these issues. Is it a year, 2 years, 3 years? I don't know if that matters, or is it really just down to the number of epics?
So the first iteration of the roadmap that we built when Pedro was leading the UX of the roadmap, we decided on having a fixed timeline, which was 3 months into the past and 6 months into the future. And this was back when we didn't have the different views available on the roadmap. We only supported months view. We didn't have weeks or quarters view. So we decided on having only a couple of months back and into the future for the roadmap by default. There was no way that user can provide any timeline like start and end dates. We would always take today as our base, and then we would go back from today by a couple of months and go into the future by a couple of months. When we introduced quarters view and the weeks view, we did the same, but instead of months, we would have a fixed count, like how many weeks or how many quarters into the past we want to look at and then fetch the data. And then came a requirement where multiple customers wanted to see how far they can look into the roadmap and see what things are coming up. And in some cases, there were some items which didn't have any start or end date. So they wanted to basically determine whether we want to limit this specific epic to a certain date into the future, which is not currently in the timeline, but may turn up later. So that was the idea where we decided to have endless scrolling. I was against that idea back then because of the implementation perspective, because I knew that the moment you work with the scroll bar and start updating a lot of things on UI, especially for a complex application as roadmap where a lot of things are rendered on the page, it is not something like Twitter timeline or a Facebook timeline where you would have endless cards. We compute the timeline bar based on dates. We update the indicator on the page based on how user scrolls. There are a lot of things going on the moment you start scrolling the roadmap page. So I wanted to keep the implementation as simple as possible. But now that we have a fresh view about having the endless scrolling for a while, and now we know that whether it is actually useful or not, we can revisit that problem about working with dates and the range. And which is why I've also left another question, like, do we have any access to Jira instance where we can have a look at the roadmap approach from them? Because they recently updated the roadmap view to include progress bars and drilling down the epics to show child epics. And from the screenshots that I saw on Atlassian's support pages, it had a neat way of working with dates. It didn't have any scroll bars, at least horizontally, where a user can scroll endlessly across the timeline. So yeah, obviously that is one way of doing it. And Gabe has already shared RoadMonk, which is something that we referenced to earlier as well. Like, we would have a separate control on the page itself where the user can move that control, and based on that, we would update the timeline to include more items from the backend. So yeah, there are a couple of places where we can look at about the approach instead of having a hard decision on having the endless timeline scroll.
And if I remember right, I think AHA just has you pick to a start and end date, and then you can do some zooming in between that to make that work, but it is a static date. Okay. No, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think a lot of products have a calendar that you set, and you could configure it different ways, and then you can brush and zoom it instead of the endless scrolling. And I don't know, did we answer your question, Kushal? Do we have an account that we could play with? Or, I mean, to your point, what I do, Kushal, is just, and I don't know if I should say this, but I just do throwaway emails and do demos of products. So like,
everybody in this business does that.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I do. So if you want to try that, you can.
On Atlassian side, is Portfolio, like, do you only get roadmap view with Portfolio? Because that's a plugin. I don't know if we'd be able to get a demo. Maybe they have a demo available plugins also.
I'm looking at one, and they have a whole lot of different views. So maybe I'm not looking at a certain view that's available, but there is different things in there that you can see and access.
Cool. Anyone else have anything? I just had a process question. Like, how do we want to, what are next steps for this issue? Alexis, do you kind of want to take it on and see if, do maybe another round of competitor analysis and see if we can get any customer interviews before we decide how to build it?
Yeah, I think Keenan, maybe take a first pass on like a direction you want to prioritize, and then we could take it from there. And I could start thinking from a design perspective how we might want to like limit, but from a back-end perspective, Keenan, you might want to look at that as well.
Yep, sounds good. I gotta just go back over all my competitor notes in this area, and then I'll come up with 3 different options, and we can start playing around with which ones we like more, and then we can surface that. And I'll probably just link it back to this issue that Kushal's brought up today.
Yeah, so just so that we're all on the same page, what we are trying to solve first is how to handle the timeline range, right? Before we can even visit the GraphQL part of it. Okay.
Question: does it make sense to remove the 12.8 milestone from the issue or epic then?
I think we can leave the milestone as it is, at least for the discussion of the time frame. Like, anything that we do to make the issue progress forward would be nice. So we don't have to close the issue or move it to backlog and not discuss it anymore. Instead, we can have that milestone be 12.8, but instead put our thoughts on how we want to work with the timeline. And then once we have anything determined for 12.8, then maybe in 12.9 we have something to work on as a front-end implementation.
That makes sense. Thanks.
I think I have the next item. One thing that I would like to do and start practicing is having engineers participate in customer discovery interviews. Maybe just like one for each one, but I think it's really valuable to have both engineers, design, and product, at least a representative from each customer interview, because the closer that we can get the engineers to the customers, I think the better solutions we're going to come to as a whole. And it also will help drive some of the discussions around feasibility when we're exploring solutions earlier on in the process, which would be great. I don't want to add like something that's super process heavy, but I would love engineers to come. And are there any suggestions on the best way to do that from the engineering standpoint? Like how do we want to initiate that? How do we want to like schedule it or see who's available in a way that's like not super expensive from a process or communication standpoint?
Can we record these? Is my first question.
Yes, we can record them, but there's also a lot of value in them being present in the synchronous thing. So not every time we can record them. Sometimes folks don't want to be recorded. And I think I would say maybe 50% of the time, but we can do our best. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great.
Sorry, I was just going to say that I would love to be invited to participate of some of these discovery interviews. In a way to get more involved and collaborate a bit more with the team, since this is something that we as the quality department are trying to push more for the next quarters.
Cool.
Yeah, and I think it's a great idea too, just to see how, from an engineering standpoint, see customers actually. I mean, it's kind of similar to like user testing, but actually seeing how customers use the products that they're building gets them a little bit closer to the actual customer value. I think from a process standpoint, from an overhead standpoint, the easiest way would be just to let myself and John be aware of the interviews, and then maybe we can do like a rotation where an engineer, like we have one engineer one engineer going to one customer discovery interview, and then just rotate through them, maybe like one back and one front end. Or myself and John will probably also go to them. But yeah, does that make sense?
Yep. And it's where like if you want to go and instead of like an engineer who's working on programming stuff, that's fine too. I think I'll just go ahead and I'll post a message in Slack whenever like one's coming up, maybe in a day or two, maybe if I know further ahead. And then you can let me know in the thread to that message, or John can, who wants to participate, or if anybody wants to just volunteer, I guess just like speak up there so everybody can do that. But yeah, I don't want to interrupt flow, and I don't want to have this be something that is like a distraction, but I do believe it will add value. And if we realize it's not adding value after, a month or two, we can change things up. But I think it'd be great to try for a while.
Cool. Agree.
The other last item I had is something, I've been looking at our progress, and we talk a lot about like, are we going too slow? Are we working on the right things? And I realized that we don't really have a planned stage, cross-functional team objectives and key results. They kind of are siloed to functional areas. And this is like it's not the most efficient way to drive business value, if that makes sense. And so I floated this to Eric Brinkman as just an idea, and he seemed like it was interesting enough to continue pursuing. So I'm going to draft some proposed OKRs for our cross-functional team and get everyone in our stage's input on that. And if we're happy with those, then I'm going to present that to Eric and also see if we can get the other functional heads on board and see if that's okay to track as our primary measure of like success instead of the functional ones. And one of them is really like a lovable experience. And I think there's a couple things to that. One would be, quality issues, like how can we decrease defects, increase performance, have more consistency in the user experience. And I think like by default, my natural inclination is always to like optimize for performance and quality, and then always go pajamas first. So those aren't like a result. Like, I guess going pajamas first isn't a result, because I would hope that we would do that anyways. But if we need to make one, we can. But I didn't know, like, I just wanted some feedback to see if anybody had any ideas for good quality targets or things that would help us have or deliver a more lovable planning experience within GitLab. So the floor is open for anybody who has input about the whole idea of cross-functional OKRs as a whole, or the specific proposed objective of lovable planning experience.
So I posted the link of an issue and an MR that Mac created in terms of increasing the collaboration between different counterparts. And so the links are there for you to take a look. One of the ideas is that we as software engineers in TAST should be more involved in the planning process and starting working more collaboratively with other engineers and UXers and product managers from the start. This is something that it's been difficult to follow with the like having lots of backend and front-end engineers for just one test automation engineer in the team, which is going to change. I think next month, Tommy is coming from Create to the Plan team as well. But still, it's true for many. But yeah, just wanted to put that in the table so that it's transparent for everyone.
I love this idea. We did this quad planning, or through Amigo, they have it noted here as well, process at version 1 when I worked there. The challenge that I see is that we don't always know, at least it seems to me, what engineer might be working on something during the planning phase. But I think there's huge benefit in having that engineer input early on, because the engineers know what's possible technically in a way that maybe not everyone else does. So I would love to see more of that in the UX and planning phase if possible. But I don't know how that changes the process down the line for dev.
Yeah, so that's interesting, Holly. And the way we have our workflow set up with the solution phase and the build phase kind of doesn't really work well to that way, in that, like, we have a set ideation step, and then we have design step, and then we hand it off to like engineering validation, where in fact, like, for that earlier validation or problem solution phase, we should probably be working closer as a group together. And then maybe instead of getting it to a complete design and getting the UX checkpoint, then handing it off to engineering, maybe we should get it to a certain point, get it over to engineering, but then UX and engineering are still heavily involved. Like, it's not really going to be built right then. It's just going to be further defined between UX and engineering. There's that. We should work through that. And Inspired has some interesting in a section on like process around that, and having like the first phase be UX designer, someone from engineering, and product and product be, I forget what they call it in Inspired. I always call it like the tripod of departments, or of
the three-legged stool.
There you go, the three-legged stool. But working together in that whole earlier phase, and then working on the build phase separately. But I don't remember. Gabe probably knows better, since he read it more recently. But so there's that, and Gabe, you can address that. But I also wanted to ask to you, Gabe, on the OKRs. So I think it's a great idea to have OKRs. Are you looking for feedback? Like, are you looking for additional objectives, or are you looking for, like, I think deliver a lovable planning experience within GitLab is a great objective. Are you looking for other KRs tied to that objective? Or are you just looking for general feedback on it? What are you looking for?
I'm evangelizing it early before I put it on paper, so that everybody understands that what they look at when they see it. And there's kind of two main objectives that I'm floating in my head. One would be the lovable experience. The other would be more around business value, like creating a suite of planning tools that, large companies can use. Right now they can't use GitLab. And so that one of the key results around that would be the 6, partner customers would commit to using GitLab at the end of 12 months. And so we'll have some like key results that step up to that and some other things there, but that's more like business results driven. And the other is like experience driven, right? Because we want people to love it. And what I would like to do is if we have just starting with 2 objectives, if there are more that you think we should have, we can look at that, but just to keep it simple. And then from there, I would look to everyone on the team to help refine the key results, the quantitative key results. Like, can we reduce our defect count, our open defect count from, I think it's at 500 something right now, to, incrementally down to 0 eventually. Like, can we increase the performance of the application and the page render time from whatever it is now, like, to something lower? Can we, like, whatever the key results are that we want to measure and track against to help achieve that objective? I guess that's where I would seek feedback and input from the team, because like usually it's the team who gets to define those. And I'm part of the team, so I want to help with that. But it also, like, engineers and UX folks have a lot of insights, so I want their input and feedback too. Does that help? I guess, like, I just don't want it to be like a mandate type thing. I want it to be something that we all care about and can align behind, so that when we make decisions on a day-to-day basis about what we're working on, it points back to those things. And I guess, like, yeah, reading Inspires is interesting, being missionaries instead of mercenaries. And I want, even though we're remote asynchronous first, I want us to like care a lot about what we're working on and have a stake in it and feel like a personal interest in it being successful. So yeah.
Are you still imagining these bubbling up to our company OKRs, or tying into our company OKRs, like to the product department OKRs? Or how do you envision that?
I don't think it's a product department. I guess that's where I'm saying it's it's business results, right? And I think the way that our OKRs as a company are broken down is by department. And because, like, engineering is a different department than product, UX lives within engineering, there's a chance for those to be kind of more like tightly coupled, but product is separate. And I feel a dissonance between, my OKR last quarter was deliver 2 opportunity canvases and record a demo of my stage, right? Like, that's helpful stuff, but it's not tied to business results. I think the same thing with like increasing the merge request throughput. That's a productivity metric, but it's not a business result. And I would like to figure out how to have it bubble up all the way to the company level somewhere. And I'm going to keep pushing on it because that's the way that you're supposed to use OKRs. But for this first like pilot, I think like we have to demonstrate that it works well. And hopefully by demonstrating that it works well, it will naturally organically spread upstream and horizontally to other stages, if that makes sense.
Yes, that definitely makes sense. And I completely agree with you. So I'm excited to see this succeed.
Yeah, I think when we talk about it bubbling up to like overall company metrics, like, the name of the game is IACV, right? That incremental annual contract value, right? So if we can, that leans right into what Gabe was describing as business value. Like, if we can actually identify what's missing for people to get to actually start leveraging Plan and get value from it, so that they can in turn get more value from the entire GitLab platform. Like, we can start tying these improvements and these expansions to IACV. I think that's the quickest route I see at the moment. But there's plenty of other opportunities to tackle business metrics as we get there. NPS, if we really want to start chasing down lovable, right? But I think that's a good place to start, I think.
Yeah, and as we evolve as a company and become more mature, like, I think the tying back to company or business value, company results is going to also shift. Like, maybe it will become about retention at some point, but we don't even have enough critical mass in the large companies like land to worry about that at this point in many respects. And so like our goal is to get people using the plan functionality. And once they're using that, then we'll figure out what the most important thing is to solve for. So I think over the next 12 months, that is the overarching like business result, is get IACV increase by having more people use plan formally instead of Jira or Rally or whatever else. So. Keena, I think you got the next one. I'm going to write up all this stuff in issue, the formal proposal, and I'll put it in the plan project and drop it in the plan channel. And we can maybe circle back next week and review a more formal proposal and iterate on that. So that's my action item.
Cool. Yeah, I was just curious, are we going to leverage work in progress limits on the board?
We should.
Yes.
Because I think we went through that issue and built out that table with the whips that we recommended. Do we want to revisit that one more time to guarantee alignment on what they should be before we? I guess I'm just looking for a timeline, right? Like we need a dog food it as soon as we can so we can get the value from ourselves and improve it.
I'm going to schedule a meeting based on the issue board call I had with the EMs and designers on Monday for the project management group. I'm scheduling a follow-on with Donald and John to walk through and sanitize the project management board and like kick everything that isn't absolutely critical out of the like prioritization and planning. And I think as part of doing that, we can talk about what the WIP limits would be, making sure, looking up at that issue and then applying them. So you're happy to hop on that. It'll be mostly like boring issue grooming stuff. But as the outcome of that, I would like to get work in progress limits set for at least the project management group. So,
yeah, I mean, I probably should just set a similar one up with Mark and Donald and John for our side then.
Cool.
When are you doing that, Gabe?
I was going to schedule, I open up my calendar and start scheduling it at the beginning of this meeting. So probably tomorrow or Friday, I would say.
All right.
Cool. Looks like that's the last thing. Anyone have anything else? All right. Great meeting.
Heart.
Go plan.
Have a good day, everyone.